Hi everyone, and welcome to Simplanova's webinar on what are extensions and how to prepare and start upgrading your NAV add-on to extensions. I'm very happy, first of all, to see many of you here. The numbers are still growing, but we had almost 200 registrants for this topic, which shows that extensions, although not a very new thing, are still very relevant today. And some ground rules before we begin. Please ask all your questions during the webinar. Please type them in the chat window or the question window, and we'll select them, and we'll have around 10 minutes at the very end of the webinar where we will try to address as many as possible during the time. If your question was not read, please feel free to send the question to us via email, and we will address it there. Now, a few words about the organizing company. With Simplanova, we have been around for the last 6 years in the Dynamics Partner Channel. We've been working with Dynamics partners exclusively, and we've managed to help more than 100 of them by now. And we've counted more than 250 successfully delivered projects together with the partners. And as many of you know by now, most of those projects were NAV upgrades, and the reason for that is that we have a number of automation tools to help us in the process to help us automate the upgrade. For a while now, we started focusing on the relatively new topic, extensions. We've introduced a service called Extension Workshops, which is also delivered by today's presenter, Thomas. And we're also helping partners to move their add-ons to extensions and move and transition them to the app source. So without further delay, I present today's presenter, Thomas Tubis, who will deliver the webinar today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. I'm Thomas. It's really nice to see so many of you here. And today I'm going to present you the topic, what are extensions and how to start upgrading your Dynamics NAV solution to extensions. I'm assuming that most of you already have some general idea about client-side development. And if you don't, nothing to be upset for, because you will be able to learn new things as well. The goal of this webinar is to get the general idea of what are extensions and how to prepare your solution before moving to extensions. So I have specified 6 main objectives today. So the first one is to shortly introduce you to the extensions. The next one is to give you the idea of how you have to prepare your solution for the extensions. Then I want to show you how you can set up your environment. Also, I want to discuss what are symbols. We will try to have some overview of AL syntax and structure. And lastly, we will try to move some modifications to events. So like my partner said, in the end of the webinar, we will be answering some questions. So we'll have approximately 10 minutes for that. I will try to avoid any deep dive in this webinar. So let's get into the first part of this session. So what are extensions? I believe most of you have already heard the word extensions many times before. And the concept behind this is very simple. Extensions, as the word suggests, is something that extends. It is a new way of modifying Dynamics NAV functionality. In other words, extending the functionality in such a way that the standard objects are not modified directly. So we separate our base objects from modifications. In this way, we will have a structure where we can install our new features or our modifications to the standard solution as an external application when the base will be left untouched. Old way of shipping the software was to provide a FOB file. And now with the extensions, we will be providing the extensions packages. These packages will be distributed to the customers. An important thing to know about that is that one solution can have multiple extensions installed, so we can provide many packages for one customer. And what does it mean for us? What does it mean for the customer? Well, basically, extensions allow us to upgrade the underlying solution. And as long as the events remain, the extensions will behave the same way from version to version. This means that this means the easier upgrade process for us and for our customers. It means that the customers will save up some money because the process of upgrading will become much easier. And what can we do with those extensions? Well, extensions can do a lot of things, but main things are that we can create new objects. We can create new objects of all types except menu suites. We can also extend existing objects. We can, but only two types of objects can be extended. So we can extend existing tables by adding fields, by modifying certain properties, or extending the triggers. Also, we can extend existing pages. We can add existing fields. We can add actions. We can move and hide fields, and also we can extend triggers. You can see in this slide, I have entered a list of supported objects for extensions. So you can see here that in CL we had almost the same objects, except here we have a couple of more new objects. So we can see that here is an table extension object, page extension object, also page customization object, and the profile, also controlled in. So these are probably new terms for you, and these are basically supported by the extensions. So AL language has actually more than CL, but just in some terms. So once we have general concept of what are extensions and how we can start, and now we can start getting into the preparation phase. And for this preparation phase, we have to check what is needed to begin moving your solution to extensions. So there are a couple of things that you have to do before you start moving to extensions. So first of all, you have to determine the target. You have to determine the target audience for your solution. Either it is going to be for one customer or sold as a service. This is important because there are a few differences on how you develop things in different cases, and also the functionality that is supported. The next thing, you have to analyze your solution, check what is going to be the best approach for you, in a way how you will move your modifications to extensions, or will it even be possible to move to extensions. And after this is done, then we can proceed to move modifications to events and convert those to AL, which basically leaves us with packaging and publishing our extension to the customer in the end. But we're not going to cover the last step from this section because our topic today is how to prepare for the extensions, not how to develop those. So let's talk about the target. With the release of Business Central, there was a huge leap in technology for Dynamics NAV because it was moved to the cloud. But however, this doesn't mean that we will have to work only on the cloud for the Business Central. We can still continue to work with CL if we want. But obviously, the suggestion will be to always start thinking of the extensions and the AL. It is up to you what you will be choosing. Either it's going to be on-premise or cloud version. Both on-premise and cloud version have roughly the same application base, hence share the same feature capabilities. What changes is the deployment type and some functionality possibilities. This takes us to the next step, code analysis. So very important thing is code analysis. You have to take time to analyze your code object by object to check whether there might be some problems if you would want to move your code or modifications to extensions. What I mean by that is that some of the modifications will be not allowed in the extensions development. So there are a couple of things you have to consider when you are analyzing the code. So first of all, if you are planning to move to the cloud, the .NET variables are no longer supported. I mean cloud because in on-premise version, you will still be able to use .NET variables. So for the cloud version, you have to check what you can do about that. Usually you will find that you can use CL code units known as wrappers that implement .NET functionality. You could try to search for a code unit that starts with .NET underscore something, for example, .NET underscore array. You can check on that and you will see that it actually implements some kind of .NET class. Also, you could be using native AL classes, which were added as an alternative way for .NET variables. Basically, AL just provides some of the base classes that were in .NET previously. So, for example, XML management or HTTP requests. So that's one other case how you can rework your .NET variables. What else you could do? You could actually try to call so-called Azure functions. Azure functions are basically externally hosted functions, no matter of what kind of code. It could be C#, it could be JavaScript, and you can call them by calling with HTTP requests from your Visual Studio Code and just return the result from those functions. But I'm not gonna talk more about that. So, which leaves us with other things. So one more important thing here is file management. Same as .NET variables, file management is not supported only in the cloud. So if you're using on-premise version, you should be good to go. And in order to refactor such code, you have to think of two scenarios. First one is when you're working with temporary files. So temporary files will have to be redesigned for using in-stream and out-stream variables in AL. And second scenario is permanently stored files. So for permanently stored files, you will have to rewrite those using another kind of form of permanent storage. This is basically because cloud doesn't allow using file management because of security issues. We don't want customers to upload some kind of code that could affect all other customers. Furthermore, when moving to extensions, you must be aware, and you will notice real quickly that not all the functions are supported that were supported in CL are now supported in AL. And to actually view those functions, you can just open any kind of code unit and go to functions, open the properties of that function and check for the property called function visibility. If the function visibility for that function is with the property external, it means that it's going to be accessed through the cloud. And if it's internal, it means that you will not be able to develop, to use that function when you are developing. Also keep in mind that not all the properties are modifiable. So some modifications may have to be left behind or have another kind of approach. Also, sometimes it is not possible to have an event in specific location of code, but for the events, we will discuss about it a little bit later on this session. So the next step after you have determined the target and did the code analysis is the environment preparation. And if you're still using Dynamics NAV on-premise and are planning to move to the cloud, what you have to do is prepare your client-side environment for the extensions development. In some cases, you may have to upgrade your solution to Dynamics NAV 2018 or to Business Central on-premise version, since previous versions do not support extension development. So in this example, I will show you how you can install and link your on-premise version of Business Central to Visual Studio Code. So to get things going, you have to install the on-premise version of Dynamics NAV or Business Central. Then download and install Visual Studio Code editor. And after you have done so, you can open your Visual Studio Code. And first step is to install AL language. So depending on your version, you must install the version which comes with your DVD files. So if we're using on-premise version, we have to install the version that comes with that DVD files. So for example, right here in this picture, we can see that in order to install such language version, we have to click on extensions on the left bar, then click on 3 dots on the top, and it opens a menu for us. And we have to select install from VS6. Once we select that, it will ask us to show the location of a file for that AL language extension. And we have to go to our DVD files, go to modern development environment folder, and go to the very end where there is a language.vs6 file. This file is basically a language extension which allows us to compile a language in Visual Studio Code. So when this is done, we know that we have set up our Visual Studio Code and we have the Dynamics NAV installed. We have to bind our database with Visual Studio Code. So in order to do so, we have to run our command line as an administrator. And after we have done so, we have to enter a couple of commands. So first of all, we have to enter cd and the path for our RTC client. And this will open the RTC folder from the command line for us. And then the command line will know that we are in RTC, and we will be able to execute finsql with additional commands. So as in the second command, you can see we are writing finsql exec command generate symbol reference, and we provide parameters for the database and the server name. So we have to specify our own database name and the server names. And after this is done, after you have run these commands, you have to create a new service map to the database, or if you already have it, just skip the step. And in order to be able to bind your database to Visual Studio Code, you have to do one more thing. You have to allow symbol generation via Dynamics NAV administration app. And after this, you will have to restart the service. So in order to change the settings to allow the symbol generation, just go to your administration app and select your service instance that is running. Go to the development section, and on the left side, on the bottom, you can see enable developer service endpoint, and also enable loading application symbol references at the server startup. So you have to select both of these. They must be checked as true, because you will not be able to link your Visual Studio Code with the database if you do not do so. And like I said, after we have done this modification, you have to restart the service. After this is done, after the service is running again, you have to open your Visual Studio Code and create a new project. This is a shortcut how you can do so, but also you can just click F1 on the keyboard, which will open the command palette for you, and type in al go. So if I would do that, we can see that I'm gonna click F1 and then al go. This will ask us to create a new project. So we can just name this project called webinar. And this is mainly just to create a project for Visual Studio Code. So after you create a project, you will be prompted to enter the settings for that server. As you can see, I have the same settings here. So since we're using on-premise version, we're gonna select your own server. So let's go ahead and do that. And then it asks us for the credentials. Just click escape unless you are using user password. But I'm gonna be using Windows authentication, so just select Windows. To actually use the Visual Studio Code properly, you can click Control Space in any location and it will provide you IntelliSense. So here you can see if I click Control Space, it will show me all the available properties. So I'm going to select Windows. I'm going to enter my server name and also my server instance. Just save launch.json and press F1 and select al download symbols. So you can actually, to open the command palette, you can just click on view and select command palette, and then type in al download symbols. This is going to send a request to our server, and it's going to try to download the symbols. Once the symbols finish downloading, you will be able to actually, it means that you have connected your Visual Studio Code with the database. As you can see here, I have my symbols downloaded successfully. It means that I have made a connection, and this sample project creates a basic page extension. And if we would try to remove this part here and see what kind of page it is extending, we can see that there are a lot of objects, a lot of symbols that we can select from. So when we are downloading symbols, we can see that AL packages appeared. So there are 2 files. So basically, symbols are in these files. Talking about the cloud, in order to have the cloud version, you have to have a subscription for the Business Central. And once you have that, for the cloud, you will have to do somewhat very similar what we just did for the on-premise version, except when creating a new VL project, you will just be connecting to the cloud environment. So when we were selecting your own server option, for the Cloud Sandbox, we will have to select the first option, Microsoft Cloud Sandbox. And one more thing, the AL language extension version will be downloaded from the marketplace, because Business Central Cloud always is using the latest version for the AL language. So what are those symbols that we were talking about? Symbols are basically a reflection of all the client-side objects. So when new objects are added, changed, or deleted, these changes must be reflected in Visual Studio Code. So in order to make these symbols available, you can do one of the following. You can manually copy the symbols file in the workspace. As I showed you the files, these are the symbols files. So we can copy those and move it to another workspace. Or we can download the symbols from the service tier, just what we did. So for the cloud version, the symbols are always automatically generated, but on the on-premise version, you have to generate those symbols. And on the first line, we can see that this command what we actually already did in the command line when we run it as administrator. So this command actually will add those symbol references to the NAV app object metadata table for the specified database. And then we can download those symbols from the Visual Studio Code. If there is no symbol generated, Visual Studio Code will just download, let's say, empty file. And in order to actually make symbols every time we compile an object or every time we modify an object, we have to do one more additional thing. We have to add a flag for our FinSQL executable file to generate symbol reference and set it to yes. It will ensure that the symbols will be generated every time there are changes. So for example, if I would go to my Business Central shortcuts and on properties, I can see that in the shortcut tab, I have a flag called generate symbol reference, and it's set to yes. So once we know what are symbols, we may start reviewing AL code. So regarding the AL development, you should know several things. For what is structure related, the AL projects actually follow folder file hierarchy. So if we would go to Visual Studio Code, we can see that we can actually open anything in the Explorer, the Windows Explorer. So let's right click on anything, any file, and reveal in the Explorer. It will show us the file in the file system, and we can navigate through all the files. So it means that everything is just a simple file in the simple folder. Also, AL files can go anywhere in the folder hierarchy, and all AL objects must be placed in AL files, which means that AL language will only compile those objects that have the extension .al. And one important thing to know that AL file can contain multiple AL objects, but it's never recommended. You can have that, but it's not really nice to have this way. You should always have a separate AL file for the object. And regarding the object structure, all AL objects follow the structure that is presented in the sequence here. So the sequence follows this. First of all, we specify the properties of that object. Then we have the object-specific constructs such as, let's say, table fields, page layout, or actions. Then we have global variables and methods and triggers as well. So if we would look at example of a table object in AL language, we can see that first of all we have, let's say, the keyword table. So it means that we have a table object here, the ID of that table and the table name. And then, like I said, the structure follows the same. So it's properties in the top. We have the table properties. Then we have object-specific things. So table fields here. And inside of that, we have additional things. We have fields and field properties, field triggers, field variables as well. And when we close the field section, we have a keys section. So it's also a table-specific thing. And after the keys section, we have global variables, we have triggers, and we have procedures. If we would look at the example of a page, we can see that it follows the same structure. It has properties on the top. It has layout, which is only page-specific thing. And inside of the layout, we can see the structure. So the same as in CL, we had area, content area. So here we have a little bit another syntax area. Then we have inside of that area, we have a sample group. We have a couple of fields, and one field has a trigger for onValidate. And that, as you can see, the trigger is specified with the begin end. And inside of that, you can see that the code is written as in this example. One new object for you guys is probably table extension object. So this follows the same structure, except it just a new logic of working. So table extension has its own ID, which can be the same as a table ID. For example, if we have 50,000 table and we can have the same ID table extension object. So table extension allows us to actually extend any kind of table. And here we can see that we have a field section in which we can modify. We can add changes to our fields, or we can add new fields. So here we can see that there are new fields added. Yeah, and one field has a trigger. Trigger has variables and some code. Same goes for the page extension. It's a new object type, and it is extending customer list object. So we can see that it is extending a page object. And in the layout section, we can see that there are some new functions called add last and modify. So add last is basically to add some specific control to, let's say, to add a field in the control one group. So there's a group, let's say, called control one, and we're adding a new field in the end of that group. So this is needed to use the add last. And the modify function is actually using to modify a specific field or a group or an action. So in this case, it's going to be a field because as you know, application code is a field for that page. So we're modifying a caption for that. And after this section, you can see that there is an action section, and we can do the same thing. We can add last, okay, and we are adding a group, and in that group we have an action. So if we would compare the syntax, we can see that everything is AL language is similar to CL, which is in the text format. So if you would export a CL file into text format, you can see that it's pretty similar to AL. But there are some minor differences. For example, AL is not sensitive to regional settings, so it follows the same date structure. As you can see, the date structure is 4 digits of year, 2 of month, and 2 of day, and also the D capital. AL includes more object and variable types than CL used to. And one more important thing is that Boolean values are always true and false instead of yes and no. So we have more consistent application now. Also, naming conflicts might arise when defining different controls. So for example, if we are trying to define an action in one page, which already was defined as a field name. So it's going to cause conflict because it doesn't allow to do that in Visual Studio Code way of programming. And also there's no documentation trigger. Some minor things as well, that several keywords have been changed. To mention some, in the client side there was a auto format XPR. Now it's with a full name, auto format expression, and some more. I'm not going to go through all of those. For the pages, the action container elements in AL have been renamed with the following table lists elements. So in the client side, when the action container name was action items, now it's processing. Activity buttons now is sections, and so on. Okay. We can actually try to create a sample object. So in order to create a file in Visual Studio Code, you can click on this button. So we can open the file hierarchy here and click on that button. And in order to create a file, you have to specify a name and extension for that file. So for the extension, we're going to use AL. So really cool thing about Visual Studio Code and AL language is that you can use so-called snippets. And snippets is a way of actually using the templates for those objects. So in order to use snippets, you can just type in T and then type table, let's say, and it will know that it's going to be creating a template for that table. So now when I entered T table, it actually gave me a template. Same would go for the T page. We can select what kind of type of page we want. Also, we can do the same with table, T table extension, T table X. We can specify the ID and so on. So here we can actually just try to modify some kind of field. And in order to do that, we can click Control Space, which will open the IntelliSense for us. And we can see what kind of things we can modify. So in order to modify something, we can just, as the IntelliSense suggests us, we can just select one kind of field. So let's just select description, and we can just add some property for that. So let's change the caption. And if we would package this extension, I'm not going to need this, so I'm going to delete this. If we would package that and publish, which we can try to do with AL package in the command palette, and then AL publish, this would publish our extension to the server, and we can then test it out. We can see that the caption of that table has changed, but the tables doesn't really matter here, because we would actually try to change the caption for the page. So since we're okay, so let's try to create a page extension as well. As you can see, there was a success message followed by an error here. So I've tried to publish the extension, and the success message showed that the package has been published to the server, and the error showed that it cannot open the starter page, but we should ignore this error because it's trying to open the web client, and this web client doesn't exist in this environment. So it's okay. We can know that the table was modified. So we can create a sample page extension. For example, let's try to create the page extension, so-called gPageX, and we can actually just modify the same thing. We can modify an item card. We can do the same modification, so you can see if it actually has applied. Caption. So I'm just going to add a new caption, and I'm going to click F5, which will basically package and publish my extension to the server. Okay, it says that we have our extension installed. And if we would try to run item card from your client side on the on-premise version, you would see that the property has another caption now. Okay. Let's continue a little bit since it's still loading. So for the extensions, you will need to know a concept behind the events. So what you have to know about events is that the way extensions work is that, as I already mentioned, is that the way extensions work is by not touching the base application. We're modifying the base without actually directly modifying it. So it is only allowed by using events. And events allow you to design the application to react to specific actions or behaviors that occur. It means that we can have a code that is moved to a separate code unit, but still does the same with the help of the events. But there are two main types of events that you have to know. So first one is publisher event. And this publisher event is actually declared by a CL function, and it allows us to cling to a specific code location. So Dynamics NAV has publisher events all over the objects. And a subscriber event, it listens for and handles a published event. So a subscriber event is actually a CL function that subscribes to a specific event publisher function and includes the logic for that event. So basically, publisher events do not have any code, and subscriber codes subscribe to those publishers and implement the logic in the subscriber. So I will show you a quick demonstration how the events are created. So let's open our development environment. And if we would have our customer table modified, so for example, if I would go to the field number, and we can see that we have our modification here. So for example, if we had our modification in the end of the validation trigger of no, in order to move this code to the events, so we are not touching the standard base, is actually to create a new code unit. And from that code unit, you have to access that function. So let's create a new code unit, and let's save it. I will call it customer table events list, and I'm gonna add a new function. So let's add a new function, which is gonna be called customer no on after validate, which means that after validation of customer no field, we were gonna have a subscriber event where will be our modification. So if we would open the properties for our function, we can see that there's a property called event, and we can select what kind of event we want, whether it's a publisher or subscriber. So for our case, we're going to use the subscriber because we want to actually subscribe to that published trigger. After this is done, we have to select the object that we want. You can just type in T18 to make it shorter, to make it quicker. It knows that it's going to access the table 18, table customer. And after this is done, we know what kind of object we want. And then we can specify what kind of function we're going to subscribe to. So there are a couple of functions, as you can see here. There are event types. So one of them is integration event, and other ones are trigger events. So integration event is basically a Microsoft provided publisher event, which are located in specific code location. We'll discuss about it a little bit after this. So let's select the event that we would like. So since I know that I'm going to be doing the business logic after I modify my number field, so I'm going to know that I'm using on after validate event. So once this is done, you can see that a new field was added, which is called event publisher event. So we have to select what kind of field we want to be accessing. So if we would try to click on this button as it did, we can see that there's a field list and we can select the field we want. So I want number field. So now we can actually go to that table that we were modifying and take out that code and actually move that code back to the code unit that we want. So let's paste this code and try to compile that. And you can see that it's missing something. So it says that it's missing some variable. So I'm going to go to the locals here, and I can see that I have my variable here, which is customer management code unit. So I'm going to paste the same code unit here for that subscriber event. And let's try to compile again. And you can see that the number field is not recognized. So in order to compile it, we have to specify that it belongs to the record that we are subscribing to. So let's add that record reference, and let's try to compile it now. So this should be fixed. And when we are done with the events, we have to remove all the code modifications from the object that we were modifying and save it. But there's a problem with that. Sometimes we might get into trouble if we do not have an event in the specific location. So, for example, if you were trying to, let's say, move the code modification from the specific location, for example, if we had the same modification that we had here stored in another part of that table. So, for example, if we had modified, let's say, it in this location, it means that we don't really have a trigger for this location. And this means that we will have to think of a way how we can re-implement our code. So this leaves us with a problem. So there are a couple of ways to do that. So first of all, you have to try to redesign your code. And if it's not possible, then the only thing that you can do, if you really need that location and if you really need to go to the cloud, then you have to actually request for that event. So I'm going to have to go to the GitHub repository that is provided here, and then you can provide a event request for that for the Microsoft team by creating a new issue and just specifying that you're asking for event request. So if I would open my code unit, or let's say that table, I can actually, if I were to open my code unit and try to search for the events that I have, so if I would try to search for event functions that I can subscribe to, you can see that there's a function called onBefore is contact update needed. So I'm gonna just rename it, and I only need that for the name. So you can see that this is an event integration event. So if I would open the table 18 customer and I would search for that function, okay, it's not shown here, but the logic behind that is that Microsoft, okay, so I copied the wrong one, but basically that integration event is just a simple function which has a signature integration event. So this is the function that I'm going to be searching for, and if I would try to search for that function, I will know that this specific trigger is located in the 1450 line. So in this location, I can move my business logic. So let's try once again to run the what was modified here item card. All right. And so, like I said, if there is no integration event for that location, the only thing you can do is ask for the Microsoft. And this is pretty much it for the events. Like I said, I wasn't diving too deep in the development and too deep into the events and AL syntax because we do not really have much time for that. So just to show basic examples, I give the most important knowledge for that. So that's it for today, for this webinar. I hope that you have learned some new things. We have reviewed how to prepare your environment for the extension development and what are extensions.
Thank you, Thomas, for